reported that he had shot 2 people. When officers arrived, the caller was on the front porch of a house on Connor Street in the city of Dayton, Ohio. The officers located the deceased bodies of Javier Harrison, Devin Henderson, in an attached garage. While at the scene, a third person, Jason Gibson, who had fled earlier, returned and was removed by the police. In all cases, sorting out what actually happened and looking for all the evidence of what actually occurred and happened and took place that night, police and prosecutors must conduct a full and thorough investigation and review of the facts and evidence before determining whether charges should be sought. There should never be a rush to judgment. In this case, after a complete and thorough investigation by the Dayton Police Department, and after review of the facts and circumstances by my office with the Dayton detectives, the grand jury has issued an indictment indicting Victor Santana for 4 counts of murder, 1 count of attempted murder, 5 counts of felonious assault, and all of these contain firearm specifications. Now, during this process, there has been some discussion and press coverage about the legislature recently amending the law on self-defense in Ohio. A person can act in self-defense in defense of another or defense of that person's residence. Whether that person can use deadly force depends on whether they had an honest belief that they were in immediate danger of death or great bodily property. A person cannot kill someone for trespassing. Simply trespassing on the property of another or damaging that property is a crime, but not a crime punishable by death. The newly amended self-defense law by the legislature does not create an open season on trespassers. Any questions? And I should turn it over first of all to Deputy Chief Carper for comments.
Thank you, Mr. Haig. As with all homicide investigations, this was taken very seriously and led by evidence and the rule of law. The evidence included physical and forensic evidence, as well as an initial and follow-up interview from Mr. Santana and more. Our department contacted the Montgomery County Prosecutor's Office immediately after the incident and met with prosecutors as well as the coroner throughout the duration of the investigation. We appreciate the efforts and diligence of the Dayton Homicide Unit, the Montgomery County Prosecutors.
In this case, John is a member of the Violent Crimes Bureau. Comment on that, John?
There are 2 victims in this. What we've done, and the grand jury has indicted on 4 counts of murder, 2 counts for each victim. Indicted him under the Murder B statute, which requires a felonious assault. We've charged him under a Murder B for shooting a handgun. We've charged him for Murder B for causing serious physical harm. So that constitutes the 2 different murder charges for both victims. So all those 4 counts, there's only 2 victims, but the facts show that he is responsible for everything he did that day and would fall under all 4 of those statutes.
And is the attempted murder charge, does that speak to the third person that was there, the third teenager?
That's correct. Jason Gibson was the survivor. He was able to get out of the vehicle. He hid underneath the car, and he's cooperating with us. He is the third victim in this matter, and that charge does represent his being a victim.
Is he still in jail?
I'd rather not come in on his whereabouts. He has his own issues going on right now, but I will tell you he's cooperated fully with the investigation and will be a victim and a witness at a subsequent trial.
What are the penalties that Mr. Santana faces?
The penalties for murder in the state of Ohio are 15 to life for each count. Because there are attached firearm specifications to each one, that is an additional 3 years on top of that. And so for each victim, he's looking at 18 years to life. So a potential possible sentence, if convicted of both, with merger issues, which is a legal issue the judge would decide ultimately, he's looking at 36 years to life on the murder charges alone. He's looking at additional time for the attempted murder on Jason Gibson as well.
A few weeks ago, we got a look at the autopsy, appearing to show the boys were shot in the back. How crucial was that in this investigation and getting these charges filed?
Well, obviously, as you know, that's very important. And as far as what the facts show, in this particular case, the deceased deceased. One was shot twice in the back, all right? And the other victim, 17-year-old again, who was in the rear seat, was shot one time in the back, one time in the arm, and one time in the right leg, shot 3 times.
And does he have a criminal record?
I'm sorry?
Did he have a previous criminal record, Mr.
The
Santana?
defendant?
Mhm.
No.
We've heard at different points in this lead up to today from some of the victims' families that made it look very hopeful that there would be some sort of charge that came out of this. Have you had a chance to speak with them today after this indictment came down?
We have, our prosecutors as well as our victim advocate have spoken with or attempted to speak with the families of the victims and to make them aware of what was going on.
What was their
Well, you know, anytime you have, when you lose a child, even if the person is arrested and brought to justice, that is just something small in relationship to the loss that they're suffering and they're dealing with. But they're obviously, I think, relieved to know that the investigation has ended and that, you know, we're pursuing justice on behalf of the 2 victims.
What do you think? You touched a little bit on the self-defense laws. Is there something important that you think homeowners people need to know about what their rights are in terms of protecting their property and that kind of thing?
Well, and there's been a lot of talk about it, but I think one has to be careful because people do have a right to self-defense. And this is not taking away or changing that at all. And the legislature didn't change the basis of that. I mean, when you look at it, these 3 teenagers were on that property to do one thing. They were smoking weed. They were in the back of this car. Part of that house, of course, has been burned, torched now, but it was boarded up. And they thought it was abandoned. So they go into these cars and they're smoking weed. That's all they were there. There is no evidence to show that they intended to do anything else. There's no evidence of criminal tools, anything like that. You know, it's interesting, when you look at the number of trespassing cases, in Dayton alone in 2018, there were 555 cases of trespassing, 400. That's almost 1,000 cases of trespassing in the city of Dayton alone. Imagine if people were allowed to shoot and kill trespassers. We'd have 1,000 more homicides in Dayton alone. But you're allowed to protect your property. That is certainly relevant and important if you're in your home or in your occupied car. That's not what we have here. This was were several kids, 17-year-olds, in the house, and smoking weed, smoking marijuana.
So what would have been appropriate for Mr. Santana to do? Just call police or try to scare him off? Or?
Well, it seems to me, and I think, you know, we see this, not just in this particular case. I mean, if you look at the number of trespassing cases in Dayton alone in the last 2 years, almost 1,000. And I think what people do, and should do, is call the police. I mean, that's what I do. That's what I think anyone would do. And that's a reasonable, I think, expectation that you're going to call the police, okay, and ask for their assistance. This is not someone who is breaking into a house. This was not someone who was breaking into an occupied car. There's nothing like that.
Can you talk about the conditions of like the detached garage and what made? I mean, did it look like it was abandoned from in their eyes, and had any evidence that they were there before?
I don't know if the police department wants to comment on that. I've not been out there yet. I plan on going out there, so I can't really tell you what my belief is out there.
Yeah, I don't have that level of detail to provide that clarification right now.
Was it ever proven that the defendant actually lives in the house? It was been said that he had several residencies in the area.
Our understanding is that obviously he was in there that evening. How long he'd been there occupied, I can't tell you. But part of the house had been boarded up. And there was no electricity, no lighting in the garage, in the unattached garage. Any other questions?
Just some of the family members over it's been almost 3 months, and they expressed some frustration with the lack of an arrest or charges. I'm sure they'll be happy with today's announcement. But can you just explain again, like what about the investigation, require that amount of time, or is this kind of the normal standard amount of time for investigations like this?
It's very frustrating. Just last week, or earlier this week, Mr. Amos had a trial, obtain a conviction, justice for the victim of a traffic homicide that happened 2 years ago. 2 years ago out in Clayton, in the area of Westbrook Road and State Route 49. And a woman was killed there. But it was 2 years. And that's hard, that's difficult. But unfortunately, it takes time. It takes time for the investigation. It takes time for test results. In this particular case, here at hand, we're talking about autopsy reports. You know, there was an original preliminary autopsy report that was issued that obtained a lot of coverage, but then we have the final autopsy report, which is slightly different. And after they look at everything, and we have the final one, and that's what we have to depend on. The police have to go on when we go to court. So it just takes time. And hopefully families understand that, but we also want them to be aware that the police and my victim witness advocates are there for them and are willing to assist them and explain why it does take time, and to work with them so that they know that their case and their loved ones are not being forgotten, that we do know what is at stake, we do know that they're suffering and they're grieving.
One last question, I'm sorry.
That's fine.
If he has dual citizenship, is it important to keep him, you know, in jail, pre-trial, or because would you be concerned that he might try to leave for Mexico? I mean,
well, it's not just him, but I think anyone who is charged with a serious felony like this, we're always concerned that they may flee. And so certainly we're going to ask it to be remanded to custody and stay there and remain in jail on a very high bond.
Mr. Heck, with the importance of this particular case, is there anything, I know you mentioned it a little earlier, but is there anything you want homeowners, for that matter, even renters, to know about being able to protect themselves in this kind of particular case, and that they don't fear for their life, not to shoot people, or can you elaborate on that?
Well, you know, again, people have a right to protect themselves. And this is not about whether someone loses a right of self-defense. It's not that at all. People have a right of self-defense. But you cannot shoot or kill people because they walk across your ground, or because they enter your yard, or because they happen to be in your garage. You can call the police. And that's what I would suggest people do. Again, we're not talking about you're in your home and someone's breaking into your home. We're not talking about you're in your car and someone tries to stop and you. There's no judgment in any case, especially a case as important as this. And sure, it would be nice if it was like some of the TV shows that are on your channels where the entire thing is wrapped up in an hour. It would be great. That's not reality. It doesn't happen that way. And we care about justice and what is the right thing to do. And, you know, through their thorough investigation and reviewing with my staff and, you know, presenting it to the grand jury, that's why we have the result we do today that we feel is justice. And that's why that we then all agree that he should be arrested immediately.
have you had any cases so far that have tested the new self-defense law? Have your office tried any cases that, like, the new changes in state law have really impacted?
We've had a couple cases. Some of them were under the old law, one or two were under the new law, but not that actually deal with this issue, not this issue, but the issue that's been floated around in the press about what does that mean? What does the change mean? Because again, the substance of the self-defense law has not changed. What has changed is whether the prosecutor has the burden to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that it was not self-defense. Okay? And in a true self-defense case, we accept that burden. But there's got to be some showing, first of all. There has to be some evidence, some showing to begin with that this was self-defense. And then you have to look at, as I said previously, was this in an occupied home? Was this in an occupied vehicle? If so, that changes everything. That's not what we have here. And I think that's what so many people fear when they hear about cases and somebody says this buzzword self-defense. Well, does that mean then somebody that breaks in my door? No, we're not talking about that. I think the law is clear on that, and I fully endorse the fact. If someone breaks in your house, you have a right to defend yourself and your house being in that house.
Mr. Eric, I know you don't do hypotheticals, and I say that with the utmost respect to you, but no one ever has the right to shoot someone in the back, am I correct?
Well, I don't want to comment on that hypothetical, because that is, I don't want to say they do or they don't. You cannot shoot someone in the back because of walking across your ground or because you see them in your unattached garage. Reflects self-defense in that case. You know, someone mentioned to me when dogs run across your yard, run into your yard, run in your backyard, do you shoot and kill them? No. When you tell people that about a dog or a cat, no, I wouldn't do that. For running across, for trespassing on my property.
Is there any update on the arson investigation?
I can kick that right away at you.
Yeah, that's actually being conducted by the Dayton Fire Department, and our homicide investigators are assisting with that investigation, but I'll leave that up to them to comment on the progress of that investigation.
Anything else?
So I have a question right here. I've been following this case myself. We were the ones out here protesting in front of you guys' office on Tuesdays, every Tuesday at 12. My question to you, Mr. Hack, are we sure that we can get some kind of conviction? Because sometimes when you do a murder charge, if it's overcharged, then he can actually walk if he doesn't get convicted. Is that possible in this case?
Okay, I'm not sure I understand your question, but you mentioned, I think, the word overcharge.
Yes.
And neither the police department nor my office overcharge anyone to review these cases. And that's why it's so important that people not rush to judgment, because that's a knee-jerk reaction that should never be. So we like to look, and we base our charges on the facts and circumstances of the case, as Chief Carper just said a moment ago. That's what drives us to the point and to seek justice.
Just making sure we don't, just making sure we get a conviction. That's what we're trying to do. Make sure we do get a conviction, because sometimes when people go for murder charges, you have to prove intent. And then if you can't prove intent in trial, then he walks.
Yeah,
I'm just hoping he doesn't walk. That's what I'm saying.
You're hypothetical, kid. I don't.
Yeah, it is hypothetical.
You agree with your
I'm sure that's
hypothetical.
what it
So. Okay.
Thank you.
Anything else? Thank you very much.